Evening. My microphone's not exactly working, but we're calling the meeting to order. It's the Wednesday, September 18th, 2019 meeting. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's all rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. That takes us to the roll call. Before we start the roll call, I'd just like to recognize that we have a few new members with us tonight. Randy Wheel from Cherry Hills Village is here. Randy, do you want to wave? Hi, Randy. Everybody, welcome, Randy. Also with us tonight is new member Rachel Binkley from Glendale. Over here. Everybody say hi. Thank you, Rachel. We also have two new alternates. I'm not sure if they're here this evening, but we have Keith Holmes from Georgetown and Ryan Tucksher from Glendale. Are either of you here? In any case, welcome. And now we'll do the roll.
Eva Henry. Here. Jeff Baker.
Here.
Elise Jones.
Here.
David Beacom.
Here.
Randy Wheelock.
Here.
Nicholas Williams.
Here.
Kevin Flynn.
Here.
Roger Partridge. Laura Thomas. Ron Engels. Libby Szabo.
I'm here.
Bob Pfeiffer. John Marriott.
Here.
Bob Roth. Here. Larry Vidham.
Here.
David Spellman. Aaron Brockett.
Present.
Margot Ramsden. Ben Baca. Here. Roger Hudson. Ken Price. George Teal.
Yes.
Tammy Maurer. Carrie Penaloza. Jeremy Fay. Randy Wheel.
Here.
Richard Champion.
I'm here.
Rick Teeter. Benjamin Hughes. Becky Thomas. Catherine Whitman. Steve Conklin.
Here.
Linda Olson.
Here.
Bill Gipp. Daniel Dick.
Present.
Drew Peterson. Bobby Sindelar. Lisa Jones. Laura Brown. Lynette Kelsey. Keith Holmes. Rachel Binkley.
Present.
Jim Dale.
Here.
Ron Rakowski. George Lance.
Here.
Mike Hillman. Stephanie Walton. Dana Gutwein. Jacob LeBure.
Here.
Isaac Levy. Karina Elrod. Larry Strock.
Present.
Lynn Shaw. Here. Joan Peck. Ashley Stolzman. Here. Connie Sullivan. Barney Drystat. Joyce Palazuski.
Here.
Paul Sutton. Sean Foray. Chris Larson.
Here.
Julie Mullica. Joyce Downing. John Dyack. Josh Rivero. Ellie Dago. Dave Black. Sandy Hammerly. Jessica Sandgren. Becky Phillips. Herb Atchison. John Voles. Ed Starker.
Here.
Adam Zarin. Rebecca White. Here. Phil Van Meter.
Thank you. We have a quorum. Could I please have a motion to approve the agenda?
Okay.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion of the motion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. So that brings us to our community spotlight. We're lucky enough this evening to get a community spotlight from Lakewood and Longmont. So Lakewood, you're up first.
Thank you, Chair. This opportunity to share some more information about Lakewood and today's community spotlight. We at the city thought there would likely be some interest in our development conversations that you may have heard of in the news. Because of this, we've asked our planning director to tell us a little bit more about what's new in Lakewood. So I'd like to introduce our planning director, Travis Parker.
Good evening. I'm going to start with the tale of a couple buildings that affected the future of their respective cities. First on the left, you've got the Equitable building in New York City. When this building was built, it upset the powers that be in New York City to such an extent that it paved the way for the creation of the first citywide zoning ordinance in the country. In 1916, New York passed a zoning ordinance that impacted height, setbacks, and basically set the stage for the skyline of New York City for the coming 60 years because of the 5-acre wide shadow of this building. On the left, you've got the Cairo Apartments in Washington, D.C. When this was built in around 1908, it upset the powers that be in Washington, so much so that the U.S. Congress got involved and over the objections of the city, created a Height Act, a 1910 Height Act that is still in place to today and controls the height of buildings in Washington, D.C., and is the reason we don't have skyscrapers in our national capital right now, this building. So you've got the Equitable Building in New York, you've got the Cairo in Washington, D.C., in Lakewood we have the Beacon. This is our 344-unit, 5-story apartment on Union Boulevard. And it and another project, a 3-story walk-up about a mile to the southwest, are the face of overdevelopment for a lot of our residents. This is the symbol for rampant growth and uncontrollable new residents to our city. And when this building was built in 1919, I'm talking about the last century buildings, but when this one was completed in 2017, we had a couple of residents that decided that, this was enough, and they initiated a petition to put a growth restriction measure on the ballot in Lakewood. It's sat in court for a couple of years, but as you are all well aware, this last July it passed and now is in effect in Lakewood. The intentions, the stated intentions on the petition were the preservation of large open parcels. There was no mention that the large open parcels they want to preserve are largely privately owned. Air and water quality, avoiding an increase in crime, and mitigation of the impacts of infrastructure in schools. The actual process put in place by this initiative in Lakewood is really twofold. First, it creates an allocation system. Every new development or every new dwelling unit in the city, from a single-family home or ADU all the way up to the apartments in the largest apartment building, has to get a housing allocation. Each January, our council will set the number of allocations for that year based on the number of houses existing in Lakewood the previous year, and divide them among 4 pools, an affordable housing pool, a hardship pool, an open pool for general allocations, and then a surplus pool that extras go in at the end of the year. Interestingly and troublesomely, you can't apply for allocations until the very end of your development process. As a developer or as a property owner, you have to go through your subdivision, your rezoning, all of your entitlement processes, start your site planning process, and you can't apply for these allocations until you've completed that potentially year-long $1 million phase of your development project before you can even ask for these allocations, and that's created some concern, obviously, in the city and among our property owners. And then once you get allocations, you only have a 5-month window to use them, or you lose them. And again, not necessarily a timeline that's reasonable given today's development timelines. The second part of the initiative is to put council review on most residential developments. Any project with more than 40 units, whether it's a single-family subdivision or a multifamily project, and interestingly, age-restricted housing, both of these have to go for a council public hearing, even if they're already fully entitled by zoning. So the council can deny fully entitled projects under this new system. Obviously, the system will start issuing allocations in January, so it's in place, but we haven't, the system hasn't actually started working yet, so we don't have a lot of impacts yet, but a couple things I can report. First, there's a ton of confusion among our property owners and developers on how this will work, and in staff, quite frankly, because there's a lot of things that will still need to change to make this workable. This ordinance wasn't written in conjunction with or consultation with city staff. And then secondly, we've already discovered and talked with our affordable housing providers that the timeline that I talked about isn't at all compatible with CHAFA processes for affordable housing and low-income tax credits. So under the current system, and until we change the timeline of this past ordinance, affordable housing won't be a possibility in our city. And then finally, it has had the effect of a moratorium on all development in Lakewood. Lakewood's a city of 160,000. Well, as far back as we've looked, we've averaged 4 or 5 new site plan applications a week in our history. A site plan is required for anything greater than a single family home. Since this passed at the beginning of July, the entire city has had one site plan application. So we aren't seeing residential applications, commercial applications, applications of any type of development in our city since this ordinance passed. So investment has completely dried up for the time being. During that 2 years that this ordinance was in hiatus in the courts, our city leaders did a number of changes to the zoning code to try and assuage some of the fears of the community. And so we have put a bunch of new and exciting things in our zoning code that I want to take just a couple of my minutes to talk about. First, we've created a new council-appointed design review committee. This 5-member committee will review large buildings over 50,000 square feet in the future in targeted areas. So the council will have to approve design guidelines in specific areas, and when they do that, those areas will then become subject to a design review committee for new projects. Secondly, we've created something that we're pretty proud of that we call an enhanced development menu. And this is a menu of project amenities that we've added to the zoning code, and it is amenities above and beyond the standard requirements of our zoning code that each project of 20,000 square feet or more will have to meet. It's a list of optional items, each with a point value, and each development will have to achieve a certain number of points by providing amenities such as on-site power generation or water-wise development or transportation infrastructure, community amenities, public art, and on and on. There's quite a list of public amenities that they can choose from. And then there's a number of other zoning changes that we've made over the past couple of years to try and improve the development process and improve the quality of developments that we get if and when we start seeing development again in the city of Lakewood. One last thing I want to touch on with my time tonight is something we are very proud of that we've done in Lakewood. In 2017, Lakewood became the first city in the nation to have fully online public hearings. We now have a website that our Planning Commission has been using for over 2 years. Our City Council has been using since January of this year. Every agenda item on our public hearings is online in its full state for 10 days before the night of the hearing. And if, as a member of the public, you click on an agenda item, you have access to all the information, including presentations by applicants and city staff, maps of the site if they exist, the staff report, any attachments, any land use plans. Basically, this replaces the packet that's normally sent to council or commission. They access this site as well, and so there's no need to print or email packets to our council anymore. The public and the council all get the same information on the website 10 days before the hearing. This site allows for a lot of interactivity, so the public can ask questions of city staff about the project. They can also ask questions of the applicant about the project. And then finally, when they've got all the information they need, it allows the submission of public comment. So this is their 3 minutes at the mic. Over the past couple of years that we've used it, we've seen ever increasing use. We are getting 5 to 10 times as much participation online as we get in person for our city council and planning commission meetings now. At a meeting a couple weeks ago, we had 3 people come to the mic and talk about a case. That same case had 34 comments online. And so what we see is a council and commission that has easier access to information. They get a lot more public comment. They can read it on their own time and their own schedule, and we can actually have shorter meetings while getting 10 times the amount of public input. Another interesting thing that we've learned from the analytics of this is the Lakewood population over 25 split out by decades. So 25, 35, 45, 55, and 65. You can see they're fairly even cohorts across. At our public meetings, this is our representation. 80% of our public meeting attendees are 55 and older. Now, when we track our online participation, it looks like this. So we're actually hearing from the 25 to 55-year-olds that can't or won't attend public hearings, but will participate online. They view the presentations, they read the materials, and they provide their comments in an online way. It has been successful, and we are seeing it expand to other communities. I'm coming in October, I think, to talk in Wheat Ridge about them adopting this platform, and I know that Kansas City, Missouri is looking at moving their public hearings online on this platform. I think that's the end of my time. My contact information's up on the board. I'd be happy to chat with anyone here about our ballot initiative, about our zoning changes, about our website. I'd love to take questions and am passionate about all this stuff and happy to chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Great presentation.
All right, thank you.
We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Director Szabo.
Sure how to, okay, here we go. My question is, didn't you establish a housing authority a few years back?
Didn't Lakewood establish a housing authority? So Lakewood used to have a housing authority in-house and now it's quasi-judicial. You're talking about Metro West Housing?
Yeah.
So,
And so you established that, but you just said now no affordable housing will be built. So how does that weigh out?
they're trying to figure that out right now. They can't get, under the new system that's in place, they won't be able to get CHFA tax credits.
Yeah, of course.
Director
They were not
Olson.
able to get anything.
That's exactly right. So we're going to have to figure that out with our council.
Okay, I was just wondering what you're going to do about that.
I wish I knew.
Director Olson.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on. So I have a question about the public hearings online. It's really fascinating.
Sure.
How did you find out what the age of the people who came to the meetings? I could see you doing a survey online where people be okay, but did you actually, take down ages? And then secondly, have you seen any noticeable differences between the kinds of comments people made if they're doing it publicly in the setting or online?
We did do some surveying at some of our early public meetings, but we also did some best guesses about ages. And what was the second question? I'm sorry.
If you saw any noticeable differences between the kinds of comments you gathered between the two settings.
That's an interesting question. It's really, we've been trying to find a way to quantify it, but what we've noticed is in person, people come if they are really excited about an issue, either pro or con. Right? They're really mad about a development. They're really excited about a change that the council's making. What we see online, we see those comments, but we also see more just constructive, moderate comments. And so there's a nice mix of comments online that we don't necessarily see in person.
Director Dale.
Is this real time so you don't have problems with quasi-judicial?
No, so we don't have, we spent a lot of time at the beginning of this. Our public hearing is now 10 days long. Our public hearing starts when this site goes up 10 days before the night of the meeting. And the entire thing is the public hearing. And everybody has access to the same information. So all of the commissioners or council members have full access to all the comments, all the information, so there's no ex parte communication, and you can't directly, except for posting public comment, you can't directly communicate with the council members.
Well, thank you. Sorry, Director Dale, not trying to cut you off, but thank you. This is really interesting, and so everybody take down this phone number here for Mr. Parker. Sounds like you'll get a lot of follow-up calls from people with other questions.
Thank you all.
Yeah, exactly. Since there's no development, you can take our calls. So that brings us to the next community spotlight, which is the City of Longmont. I see Director Peck standing up.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Thank you. I don't have any staff member accompanying me, so bear with me. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. It's basically where, then and now, where did Longmont come from and where are we going? So, and it's going to spotlight, I guess, our pioneering spirit. So where did we start? Longmont started with a group of men from Chicago who bought membership in 60,000 acres in Colorado and called it the Chicago Colorado Colony, which was renamed Longmont for Long's Peak. Longmont soon became a farming agricultural community, growing sugar beets, wheat, and fruit trees. Along with this growing diversity, come on, you can do this. Farming soon led to migration from workers from Mexico, Germany, Sweden, and Japan. leading the way for our diverse community today. Sugar beets became one of the most profitable crops with the residents, and they built a sugar mill on the eastern part of our city to process the sugar beets. So we're a growing city that went from sugar beets to microchips. And in 1872, we put in the first flour mill for our wheat population. J.H. Empson put the first cannery founded in Longmont. J.C. Penney opens his very first store, which was a meat market on Main Street in Longmont. Longmont Sugar Factory opens, which was renamed the Great Western Sugar Factory, processing our sugar beets. Gibson Manufacturing Company opens its factory there. And we have our great turkey plant, which was bought out by Butterball. IBM started construction in 1965 on a plant between Boulder and Longmont. And then in '86, we got our very first mall, the Twin Peaks Mall. This is a J.C. Penney store, which is still on Main Street in Longmont. And the turkey plant, as well as IBM, were the biggest employers in Longmont. IBM, the school district, are still some of our biggest employers. In 1993, West opens its safety services. Circle Graphics came in '99. In 2000, we got Seagate. GE Energy moved into Longmont on Nelson Road. And Tinkermill, which is, it's an entrepreneurial workspace. Many small businesses in Longmont got their start at Tinkermill, as well as many of the patents that we are proud to call ours. Left Hand Robotics was founded in 2016, and in this year, 2019, Smuckers opened their plant for their Uncrustables. Today's top employers are Seagate, West, Smuckers, FAA, McLean's, Circle Graphics, Crocs, Xilinx, and Digital Globe. Many Japanese Americans who were imprisoned on the West Coast during World War II came to Longmont to work in the wheat and sugar beet fields, and many of them stayed, leasing farmland on their own and becoming extremely profitable. In 2006 and 2018, Longmont was voted an All-American City by the National Civic League. We have two sister cities, Chino, Japan, and Ciudad Guzman, Mexico. The Hispanic Education Foundation in Longmont gives many scholarships to our local residents. El Comité was formed as it's a nonprofit organization improving social justice education and helping a lot of immigrants get their citizenship. Our Longmont Youth Center is open to all youths, and it is the home of our Longmont Youth Council. And here are some incredible things that we celebrate with. Longmont is a pioneering spirit, and we tend to make our own infrastructure. In 1880, a devastating downtown fire in Longmont led to the formation of the first firefighting company, and this also led to our clean water system. Our forefathers, because our forefathers purchased abundance of water rights, Longmont's been able to build reservoirs, with the most recent one being the Windy Gap, 8,000 acre-feet of water at Chimney Rock Reservoir, and which is in its first phase of construction. We get our water now from Button Rock Preserve, Golden Ponds, Lake Union, and Lake McIntosh. In 1886, we had our very first electric lamps. There were 8 of them in the whole city. And then we got the power from the Northern Colorado Power Company. And then we decided that we wanted to be on our own and generate our own electricity. So we built a hydroelectric plant near Lyons. And then we built a diesel plant on First Avenue, which is now our incredible cheese importers. If you've never been there, you should try it. And in '73, Longmont, Loveland, Fort Collins, and Estes Park joined forces to form the Platte River Power Authority. And in 2016, we built the Rawhide Flats plant to provide solar power. There's our hydro plant and our diesel plant. And this is the gym of Longmont that I have to show you. No sound.
Lines are what give us shape, form, and definition. They connect the dots and even the stars. Truth is, we depend on lines. And in Longmont, we like to draw our own. It's part of our independent spirit. It's in our history and our heritage. We don't wait for progress to happen. We make it ourselves. We talk about it, we vote on it, and we get it done. Over 100 years ago, we built lines to carry our power, to light our community. Now, our light and our lines have come full circle. We've built new lines to light our future and fill the next chapter of our history. These are the lines of Next Light, Longmont's community-owned and operated broadband internet and phone service. A 100% fiber optic network with speeds and performance among the fastest in the world. A parallel universe where you can reach across space and time at the speed of light. Connect and stay connected, because the only lines that matter are the ones we draw ourselves. Next Light.
So where do we go from here? Our transportation, we're working with Boulder County and RTD to put BRT on 119. I'm still working hard on the peak rail service, and we have a transportation hub at the First and Main station. In this year, we passed our inclusionary zoning ordinance mandating 12% of new development be affordable. Do you like that music?
Longmont, Colorado is a thriving 21st century city with the dynamic features of a metropolis while retaining a classic small-town feel. Boasting an impressive blend of arts and culture.
There you go. Sorry about that. Our main street is still at the heart of our community and open space. We are surrounded by open space, and we're in the process of purchasing a parcel in the northeast corner of the city by Highway 66. Our River Corridor project, Council adopted a work plan earlier this year to address the paths to move Longmont forward. One aspect of the plan is to develop the River Corridor with an epicenter in mind while maintaining our environmentally healthy riparian and wildlife habitats. And just an example, these are renderings of where we are going to go. This is our South Main Street, or 287, that we want to make friendlier, bike-friendly, multimodal. This 4-story apartment complex is already being constructed, and like Lakewood, the residents are furious that we're going up 4 stories. We have a ballot issue for an aquatic center on the November ballot. We've just finished a feasibility study for our Arts and Entertainment Center, which will also be facing, hopefully, on 287 with our disputed 4-story apartment complex just down the street. And this is we're working with the TOD for our bus and peak rail service for our transition hub at the corner of First and Main. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Let's all thank Director Peck. Well, thank you. The Community Spotlight has come to be one of the best parts of our meetings, and we are excited that in October we will get to hear from Broomfield and Sheridan. Look forward to that. That takes us to the report of the chair. I would just like to briefly turn it over to Director Dale to tell us about the Air Force.
Everybody, you know what today is? It's the Air Force's birthday.
Happy
Back
birthday.
in 1947, the Army gave us an opportunity to excel, and today's our birthday.
Yay.
Thank you, Director Dale. That takes us to the report of the Performance and Engagement Committee, which did not meet, which takes us to the report of the Finance and Budget Committee.
Thank you. We did meet. I don't know why this microphone isn't working. Can you all hear me?
Always, Kevin.
There we go. All right, there we go. We had 2 action items today, and one was to apply for a grant, to approve submission of a grant from DOLA for up to $300,000 to coordinate census outreach efforts for older, harder to reach populations in the DRCOG region. And by older, they meant people over 60. So nevertheless, we approved that. And then we authorized Doug to execute an IGA with CDOT to provide our funding this year for the coordination of traffic signal between and among our jurisdictions. Then we reviewed and discussed the initial budget for next year, and we'll have a broader discussion and vote on that next month and bring it to the board in November for 2020. And that's all.
Thank you, Director Flynn. That takes us to the report of the Executive Director.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few things. So first and foremost, the admin item, there is no October board work session, so you're welcome. Board workshop. I hope everybody had a good time who was able to attend the board workshop. I think we got a lot out of that. I know we sent out a survey to kind of get your opinion and reaction to that. So if you get an opportunity, please fill that out. It truly does help us in planning our future events. So if you could do so, that'd be great. Go-Tober event. So our Way to Go program is kicking off our primary fall event, and it's an employer campaign, and it's called Go-Tober. We've been doing it, this is the 5th iteration of that, and during the month of October, large employers will be encouraging their employees to give up their single occupant vehicles and take at least one alternate mode each week. Companies and employees will be competing for prizes and bragging rights. We have 75 large employers across the region participating this year, including several of you that are in this room, the town of Castle Rock, City County of Broomfield, cities of Arvada, Littleton, North Glen, Westminster, Aurora, Lakewood, Longmont, and the City County of Denver are all participating in that event. So thank you all very much. It's always a fun event where it's gaining in popularity. We're really getting, every year we get more and more companies step up to the plate. So good luck to you all. You're not beating us. So on Thursday or Friday last week, Jefferson County and the downtown Evergreen Economic District hosted a technical advisory panel in partnership with the Urban Land Institute, or ULI. These TAPs, this is a second one that we've been part of this year. It's a 1.5-day workshop, and it's typically on land use and development issues. And we provide a local match for this event. The TAP explored issues affecting downtown Evergreen, including design and redevelopment solutions that consider property characteristics, topography, financing, zoning, and hazard mitigation. And as you know, none of these programs are possible without the key input from stakeholders. So we're especially thankful for the dozens of Evergreen residents that participated in this, along with business owners, nonprofits, private developers, and local government, and CDOT staff. So thank you all very much. And I think it was quite successful from what I understand. So another one is good. Regional Vision Zero plan. Last month I showed you the video that we created in-house associated with our Regional Vision Zero initiative. We held our 3rd Regional Vision Zero stakeholder meeting on September 5th. And all the stakeholder meeting materials, if you're interested, are on the DRCOG website. You can just simply Google the Vision Zero and it will come up, or search rather, for Vision Zero and it'll come up. And it also includes a survey in there, both English and Spanish, that we're trying to get as much information as possible so we can begin our data analysis and the like. So DRCOG and our consultant team will be conducting some local agency meetings in the coming months throughout the region to present the existing conditions analysis and begin developing actionable strategies at the end of October and November. So stay tuned. There'll be one within your area. 2050 regional transportation plan. Think about that. I remember when I started this business, they were talking about the 2020 plan. And I said, holy cow, that's forever and ever away, and it's not. That's why I'm wearing these glasses anymore. So we've already started our public engagement effort. Staff has done a tremendous job this go around, I must say, with just our public outreach. So we also have another survey available, a public education survey, which is live in both English and Spanish on our DRCOG website, and we encourage everyone to take that so we can begin to identify the issues and needs within our region. If you wouldn't mind sharing that survey, that would be fantastic. Okay, this next time, I know we send you guys a lot of surveys and ask for your opinion on a lot of stuff, but we truly do appreciate you guys filling those out, and we do appreciate knowing what you're thinking. Jerry told me I had to be super nice when I mentioned this one. That's the executive director evaluation that you received. And again, you know, there probably is room for a little bit of improvement, I'm sure. So I would hope that you would take a few minutes just to fill that out, what you feel comfortable providing, and that will be then shared with the Performance and Engagement Committee that's responsible for the evaluation, and so forth. So if you could, we're looking to close that on Monday, the 23rd. So if you could probably do that over the next few days, that'd be great. Or watching KU football, which won this past weekend. We have any, no Jayhawk fans here? Alrighty, I'll move on. We got to kick you. It's the first road win at a Power 5 school since 2008. So it was a big deal. Right? All right. Okay, I got one last thing. So, right, bigger than that. So Money Magazine, in partnership with Realtor.com, came out with the best places to live in America. They came out with this on Monday. Did you guys see this? And we had 4 communities within our region that were within the top 100. So Denver was one, and they specifically noted Lodo. It was actually referenced as Lodo, Colorado, which I thought was a little weird.
They don't live there.
Don't know. Maybe they're splintering off. That's right. They were drinking down there. So Denver was one. Town of Castle Rock was one. Centennial, and finally Longmont. So all 4.
Round of applause.
Yes. Of course, you're all winners to me. Be sure to fill out my evaluation. And with that, Madam Chair, I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director Rex. That takes us to the portion of the meeting for public comment. Up to 45 minutes is allocated now for public comment, and each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes. If there are additional requests from the public to address the board, time will be allocated at the end of the meeting to complete the public comment. The chair requests that there will be no public comment on issues for which a prior public hearing has been held before the board. Consent and action items will begin immediately after the last speaker. Are there any public comments? Thank you. Seeing none, that takes us to the consent agenda. Could I please have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Okay.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. That takes us to agenda item 10 and attachment B in your packet. We're discussing the 2020 Human Services Transportation, which we'll call HST from now on, set aside program funding. Matthew Helfant, our senior planner in long range transportation planning, is going to take us through that. Matthew?
Is it on? Good evening. Matthew, pardon? Oh. Good evening. Matthew Helfand, Senior Transportation Planner here at DRCOG. Last year, you set aside $4 million over 4 years for human service, our chair already called it HST, as part of the latest HIP. This new set aside directly addresses
board-adopted TIP focus area of improving mobility for vulnerable populations such as older adults, individuals with disabilities, veterans, and people with low income. This set-aside is intended to complement the FTA 5310 program, as well as Older Americans Act and Older Coloradans Act dollars by funding identified needs that are underfunded or underserved by those sources. DRCOG conducted a joint call for projects with CDOT, and this joint call for projects included the HST as well as 5310 for the Denver-Aurora urbanized area. And this call was for projects in the 2020 calendar year. DRCOG and we issued a call for applications using a single notice of funding availability, or a NOFA, if you guys have heard that term before, and applications for both funding sources were evaluated by a panel made up of DRCOG staff from Regional Planning and Development, as well as the Area Agency on Aging, and CDOT staff, plus staff from other agencies, including Mile High Connects, Denver Veteran Services, Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment. We also invited AARP, but they were unable to attend. Projects that scored the highest were recommended for funding and placed into the funding pot that was most appropriate, or the only appropriate funding pot based on that project's characteristics and the eligibility associated with the funding pots. The panel recommended funding projects with HST totaling just over $900,000. And DRCOG will use the remaining $97,000 to recoup additional costs associated with administering the 16 projects funded through this new program. The projects are located in your packet, and I'd be happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Matthew, for the presentation. Could we please have a motion to frame the discussion and debate? The motion could be either to approve or deny the 2020 Human Services Transportation Projects as proposed by CDOT Joint Call for Projects and Peer Review Panel. Motion to approve?
I'll second.
There was a motion to approve. Is there discussion or questions on the motion that's on the table? Last chance for discussion or questions. Seeing none. All those in favor of the motion?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. So that takes us to our next agenda item, which is discussion of Proposition CC. It's attachment C in your packet. Our senior, actually, Ed Bowditch is here. Rich is not here. He's on vacation. So he is going to take us through a presentation on Proposition CC.
Good evening, and thank you for the invitation to make this presentation. And my business partner Jennifer's not here, and Rich is not here, so they left me unattended. Tonight I'm going to talk briefly about Proposition CC. This has to do with a measure that will be on the ballot. Ballots will be mailed the week of October 14th, and the election is November 5th. This measure deals with Tabor. So briefly, what is Tabor? Almost everybody knows the first provision of Tabor, that you can't have taxes without voter approval. This was passed in 1992 on its third attempt on the ballot, and it has been in the Constitution of the state of Colorado since then. The other provision of Tabor sets a revenue cap. So the state has to track its revenue, and revenue can't increase by more than a certain formulaic amount each year. And the amount increases by the population plus inflation figure from one year to the next. If the state exceeds this revenue cap, then the state must issue tax refunds to its residents. So what's happened since Tabor passed? You can see on this chart, and you can see there are columns going downwards here. What's happened since Tabor passed? The first few years Tabor was implemented, we did not have any Tabor refunds. Then we get to the late 90s, and suddenly the economy really heated up, and the state was collecting a lot more revenue than the Tabor limit allowed. By the end of that decade, and starting in fiscal year 97-98, we had a Tabor refund of $563 million. We thought that was a lot of money. Till the next few years it came in, and by the end of that decade, we had billion-dollar refunds going back to the taxpayers. If anybody remembers doing your taxes in those years, on April 14th at midnight, you'd go down, you'd get to one point of your tax form from Colorado, and it would say, credit $500 per person. You were like, oh my gosh, where did this come from? That was the Tabor refunds we had. Suddenly, the 2001-2002 economic crash occurred, and the refunds went away. You can see for the next 15 years, in part because of the passage of Ref C in 2005, we had no Tabor refunds. But I like this chart because it emphasizes that sometimes Tabor refunds are there and sometimes they're not. The total Tabor refunds, not inflation adjusted, since the passage of Tabor are about $4.7 billion. What this measure would do is allow the state to retain any amount of money that is considered a refund. The state would track that and keep it. Based on the June 20th revenue estimates, these are the quarterly revenue estimates that the state receives, the state's anticipated to have Tabor refunds of $310 million this year and $342 million next year. Now, we're going to get new revenue estimates on Friday of this week. These numbers will change. What does this mean per person? If you have an income between $40,000 and $90,000, you'd get approximately a $35 per person tax refund based on these current Tabor refund estimates. Again, that will change on Friday. Last session, the legislature, in a bipartisan manner, you had Speaker Casey Becker and Representative Julie McCluskey, who's from Summit County, Senator Lois Court from Denver, and Senator Kevin Priola from Brighton. They passed two bills that would put this debrucing measure on the ballot for this November. It's a statutory revenue question, so it doesn't change the Constitution, but it would allow the state to keep all the revenue that's collected under current tax rates. These bills also specify that any of the revenue that's retained would be divided in equal shares, 1/3 for higher education, 1/3 for K-12 education, and 1/3 for transportation to be allocated through the Highway Users Tax Fund. Both of these bills, when they were in the session last year, were supported by DRCOG, by the DRCOG board. Tabor, when it passed, applied not only to the state, but every level of government in the state of Colorado. Since 1992, the overwhelming majority of governments have gone to their voters and have debruced themselves. You have 230 of 272 municipalities. That's 85% of municipalities have gone to their voters, and the voters have said yes. Tax limit still stays, but whatever revenue comes in at those limits, you can keep. 79% of the counties and 98% of the school districts have gone to their voters to debruce. Legislative Council, the nonpartisan research staff, puts together that election blue book guide. This year it will be very thin because there are only two measures on the statewide ballot, this measure and the sports betting measure. They prepared the draft arguments in favor and opposed to this measure, and I've summarized them here. In favor of debrucing, in favor of voting yes on this measure, this will allow the state to make critical investments without raising taxes. That's according to the nonpartisan legislative staff. This measure does not change citizens' abilities to vote on future tax increases. A lot of people will say, this does not affect the main reason for Tabor. That is, you can't raise taxes without voter approval. This has nothing to do with that. Those people who are opposed to debrucing, and legislative staff, when they come up with these arguments, they circulate drafts to as many interested parties that they can think of. People can go online and sign up to receive them, make comments, then the staff summarizes them. those people who are opposed to debrucing, it's a permanent tax increase. While the rates may not be changing, government is growing. Also, they say this is an erosion of Tabor and the constitutional projections it provides. So again, you have, these are the arguments that are currently out there. Those people who are opposing the measure, those organizations, include Americans for Prosperity, Cato Institute, Independence Institute, and the Tabor Foundation. On the next page, you can see those people supporting the measure. Include some chambers of commerce, school organizations, and the Hospital Association, and others. Again, as a observation, I would say a lot of times there are a lot of very complicated measures on the ballot. I don't think this one, I think this one is pretty clear. Let the state keep the revenue or not. That's what this is all about.
Thank you, Mr. Bowditch. So I just want to make a couple of comments. First, we're talking about this tonight because there's a transportation nexus, and we're a group that talks about aging and transportation issues. So we're bringing this before the board to determine if the board would like to take a position on this ballot measure, which has an impact on transportation funding, which is something that this group takes up and talks about. I also want to point out, which was in your packet, that in our Articles of Association, we have agreed to work together with an affirmative vote of the majority of member representatives shall be required to adopt a motion taking a position on any ballot measure. So that means that tonight we would need 28 members to vote in concurrence to take a position either way on the ballot measure. And the third thing I would just, this is a personal note, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming this evening and turning out to get a 28-member vote. We do need really good attendance, and so I thank everyone for coming out, regardless of what side of the issue you fall on. This was personally very important to me. It's my 10th year wedding anniversary, and my husband and I decided it was more important for me to come here. So everyone be on your best behavior. No, I'm just kidding. So I'll open it up with a comment, and then we'll take comments from directors and try to hear from one another in a respectful manner and hear all the different perspectives on the topic, and then perhaps make a motion. So from Louisville's perspective, we talked a lot about this measure and how this affects Louisville and how it affects the region. So if you look at fiscal year 2021, there's projected to be $342 million in revenue that would go above the cap, but it's, from our perspective in Louisville, just revenue that the state would collect at the normal tax rate. So when you look and you do the calculation with the third about what that would do for the city of Louisville, that's $96,000 that we would normally get that we would be refunding back to people. So that's $96,000 of transportation HUTF funding that we would normally be able to get if there was no cap, but we will not be seeing if we don't get rid of it with the Proposition CC. So I did the calculation for a few of my friends and colleagues on the board. So for Castle Rock, that would be $320,000. And for someone like Aurora, that would be $1.9 million. So that's direct money that's allocated directly to our local governments. So there's other transportation funding in there. There's CDOT money. There's money that goes into the multimodal options money fund. So a dollar here, a dollar there, pretty soon you're talking about real money. So this really does impact us locally. We have control over how we can spend these dollars. I know in Louisville we're very fiscally responsible and try very hard to make sure the citizens' dollars go very far and for exactly what they're collected for. And there is a backlog of projects that this money could be very useful in addressing. So the city of Louisville is asking everyone this evening to vote in favor of Proposition CC. Are there any, could a few people raise their hands so I can get a queue of people who'd like to speak on the matter? Director Vittum?
I don't think it's on.
Oh.
Technology.
Well, as I was saying, some of you will want to write this down so you can get a tattoo, hit a tattoo parlor on the way home, and get this, someplace. Economics is the study of how best to utilize scarce resources that have alternate uses. Okay, so in the time period 2018-2019, the Colorado state budget is just a hair under $30 billion. Okay, so the raw fact is that there is ample money to have pristine roads in this state, to properly fund education, and to properly fund AAA. But in the past, other people have chosen to use those resources for other things. The state of Colorado has about 273 programs that benefit the citizens of the state in some way. Some of those items are extremely expensive, but they bring an enormous benefit to the population. Some of those items are extremely expensive and bring minimal benefit to the population. So the best path forward for the people of this state is, number one, to vote no on CC, and number two, to do a cost to benefit analysis of all 273 programs that the state provides to the populace. Take the bottom 10% and do one of two things: either reduce the funding to those programs that show the least benefit to cost, or totally eliminate them. And after the state legislature, the governor, and the leadership of this state develops the testicular fortitude to make those decisions, then additional taxation on the populace will be unnecessary. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Director Vittum. Would anyone else like? Director.
Yeah, I just wanted to report, Arapahoe County, we discussed this among our 5-member board of county commissioners, and we are one of those 8, I believe, counties that have not debruced. And so we had a split vote, but the majority voted to oppose CC. So that's how I'm going to vote tonight.
Director Jones?
So I would, on behalf of my constituents, we are supporting Proposition CC, and I would encourage a yes vote for DRCOG for a couple of different reasons. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. One is we always represent our jurisdictions as elected officials, but when we come to the DRCOG table, we also wear our regional hat and do what is best for the region. And we have supported and adopted legislative principles around what's good for the region. And if you turn to page 9 of our legislative principles, it outlines in detail what DRCOG's stances and principles are around transportation funding, which is we're supportive of looking for more funding for transportation to try and address the $9 billion backlog. And I appreciate Director Vittum's call to make sure that we're spending taxpayers' dollars wisely, but we have a $9 billion backlog for transportation. CC is not going to solve that, but it's a step in the right direction. And as we sit around the DRCOG table and try to enhance mobility in this region, we need to be looking for solutions like that. And I would turn to the wisdom of our communities to say most of us, and that's certainly not everyone, as Director Baker pointed out, most of us have looked at the Tabor measure, taken advantage of the Tabor instruction, and have asked our own communities to debruce. Because while we're fiscally prudent, we recognize that many of the costs that we deal with in our communities, like the costs of asphalt and road construction, far outpaces the cost of inflation, and therefore it doesn't work for us to not be able to keep all the revenues that we collect. We need those for very important public services like our transportation system. And so if our communities have looked at Tabor and seen the wisdom and saying, nope, we need more flexibility in spending, it does serve to follow that our region it would make sense for us to make that same calculus and say, yes, we need more flexibility. We need to keep the revenues that we're already collecting, so it's not a new increase in taxes, and start applying them to the $9 billion backlog that we have in our transportation system in the state. So I would strongly urge a yes vote.
Director Teal.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm going to speak against a yes vote. I'm going to speak that we do not support this for two reasons. Castle Rock is one of the municipalities that has not debruced. We still live with Tabor, and we still work with Tabor in our budgeting process. We have not given back any refunds since 2005, but in 2015 we did have a Tabor surplus. We made a decision as a council to take that to the people and ask, would you like to have your refund, or would you like the town to retain it? And specifically, our priorities were public safety and, ironically, transportation. And the people of Castle Rock said, yeah, go ahead and hang on to that. Please do spend that $700,000, which was our Tabor surplus for 2015, and we poured that $700,000 into equipment for the firefighters, our police officers, and we were able to even get in a couple of relatively small transportation projects. We're like you guys, I'm sure. Our transportation projects started at $1 million, generally. But the people said, yeah, we trust you, Castle Rock. My concern with CC is that it will take away that option to have that conversation at a state level of, we have a surplus, how would you, the people of Colorado, like the state to spend that surplus? Or do you just want it back? That's what CC takes away from us. It takes away that additional opportunity to discuss with the people of Colorado how that surplus could be used. That's the first point I wanted to make. The second point I wanted to make is kind of one a little more practical, and there are quite a few of us in this room who are used to it, in that, guys, this is bad legislation. This is bad legislation from virtually the moment that it was passed out of the House and the Senate. All the talk this year of a special session that Governor Polis was trying to convene was to fix one bill, this one. This is not polling well. This is likely to fail, just like 110 did last year. So I would ask that we do not support this, and once again prove to the people who we serve that we're out of touch. We're driving an agenda that actually is not in touch with them. Because, guys, this is not going to pass in the fall. We want to once again prove to our own constituencies how out of touch we are when we convene in this chamber. That concludes my comments, Chairman.
Thank you. Director Brockett?
Thank you, Chair. Well, of course, our primary purview here at DRCOG is transportation, and as Director Jones pointed out, we do have in our legislative principles the support of additional transportation funding. And we did, I believe, support the underlying bills for this legislation back in the last session as a body. But I do just want to say, as elected officials in our various jurisdictions, we are responsible for the overall well-being of all of our constituents. And I just want to make the point about the education funding, just that currently Colorado has one of the strongest economies in the country, but our per pupil funding in K through 12 is at about 37th, and for higher education is at 49th. So I think that's worth considering as well, and I would urge us to support the measure. Thank you.
Thank you. So just so everyone knows, I've been watching for very subtle clues from people to see that they want to speak. So if anyone would like to speak when someone else is speaking, you can raise your hand or make a small gesture and I'll put you on the list. Director Mullica.
Thank you so much. And specifically for the city of North Glen, we debruce. Our residents believe in this effort. Just to kind of speak to the added touch comment, so it is election season, right? And probably many of us are on the doors. I know that I am. I'm walking my neighborhoods. I'm talking to my neighbors. And I can't tell you how many times I hear people are concerned about the lack of education funding and the lack of transportation funding. Our city can't keep up with the projects we have. We can't do it. And so we, North Glen, completely support DRCOG. FCC.
Thank you. Director Strzok?
Probably a simple question. Passage of CC adversely affect the senior?
Mr. Badich?
3 years ago, the legislature passed a law that said the senior homestead exemption would be counted as a Tabor refund in those years in which there was a Tabor refund. If the Tabor refunds go away, absent any other change in law, the state is still required to fund the senior homestead exemption. Now the state, when the state's economy, just to give you a little more information, senior homestead exemption passed in 2000. The state has the ability to zero it out and has done so twice, when the economy crashed after 2002 and again after 2008, and brought it back both times. But absent any other change in law, the senior homestead exemption is unaffected. Just how it gets paid for will change.
All right, thank you. The other thing that kind of bothered me about it was, where's the real incentive to balance your budget? I mean, if every year at the end of the year we have excess money left in our budget, we're going to be able to keep, we're going to keep our budget the same. Every year our budget's just bigger and bigger and bigger. I don't see incentive to really balance your budget. Cost that amount.
Director Strzok, are you asking a question or making an observation?
Probably an observation.
Okay. I just wasn't sure if we wanted Mr. Bowditch to try to attempt to answer the question or not. Director Flynn?
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
There you go.
Ed, could you clarify? Ed, could you clarify to Director Strzok's question? The homestead, the senior homestead refunds to the municipalities has occurred in every year that there has not been a Tabor refund as well, correct?
Mr. Bowditch?
I'm looking at the chart up here.
Yes, that is correct. The senior homestead exemption has been in place every year in which we have not had a Tabor refund.
So it is not dependent on there being a Tabor refund. I know that because I got my first one last year.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's correct.
It seems to me, just to follow on Directors Jones and Brockett, that we do balance these budgets. We have to balance our budgets, and it becomes harder and harder with the ratchet effect that Tabor implements. We see the result of it in the massive, for many families, massive increases in the cost of in-state tuition to our state educational institutions. That's where we're making up the balance. So when the legislators have to make those cuts to higher ed because of the restrictions imposed by Tabor, you have it coming out of the families' pockets on the back end in much higher tuition and in much higher costs to our local schools as well. And so when I believe, frankly, that when the voters say, we approve this tax rate, we approve this mill levy at the local level, we approve this income tax rate, this state sales tax rate, when they say that, to then say that when in the good years, when we exceed population and inflation, you have to give that back, but in the bad years, you can't catch up. I think that that is the fault, the underlying fault that many of us see in Tabor, but it's actually the underlying purpose that Doug put in there, which was the ratcheting effect to eventually make government do with less in resources than it actually needs, and to transfer those costs onto our families in Colorado in the cost of going to CU Boulder or to Metro State or to any of our other institutions. So I personally polled every member of the Denver City Council, and I've been authorized by them to vote yes on this tonight. I will do that.
Thank you. Director Dale.
I think where you are is where you sit. And where I sit, I talk to people, they talk about schools. And when I talk to people, they go, you mean we're only putting 7% of state money into our universities? And it used to be 20-something. How many people this place could go to school today and if they had lived with that? And people talk to me about roads. How come all this congestion on Highway 6? Well, if we would have voted for 110, we would have had that overpass here, and that shovel-ready projects. Well, this would help us with that. But the things that I hear from people are about, I'm going to take care of my kids and their education. When are we going to get the roads improved? And these will make small steps towards that. And I really appreciate Director Flynn's discussion about the ratcheting effect, because this is onerous, is what it does to the thing. And there's lots and lots of programs for helping people that we differ on, because where you are is where you sit.
Thank you. Director Shaw.
Thank you. I'm going to speak in favor of the motion. I understand that it has many flaws. It doesn't address the underlying issue, which is the interaction between Tabor and Gallagher, and I wish the legislature would actually, fix the problem. But as a board, we represent the organization involved with transportation, and this is an opportunity for us to receive transportation dollars. I think for that reason alone, we should come in favor of this. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Beacom?
I'm going to speak first, and then I'll tell you what I've been authorized to do. The first is, a question came up about how do we know where the money is actually going to go towards education, towards the transportation. All of a sudden, I'm blank as to the third part, but
12 and higher.
yeah, it's age. But so how do we know it's going to go where they're telling us going? Because I believe they did something similar to this in 2005 when they did a couple other things and the money didn't end up where it was supposed to go. So I needed kind of an answer to that. The other part was that the issue of being a tax refund because you've overpaid your taxes, meaning if you do keep the extra that you paid on your taxes, that is a tax increase. I think a lot of the wording and a lot of the justification going on, a little bit of sleight of hand and some magic. Now, does Colorado need the money? Absolutely. But we also need a legislature that goes in there and fixes the whole problem. And we don't have anybody, as they were referred to as having enough strength to be able to stand up and do something. So we've got a bigger problem, and I think for the future. And everybody has been also talking about the fact that people want the transportation, they want the other things. 109 and 110 went to the people and they said, nah, we don't think so. So how do we justify believing that now they want us to spend the money on transportation? So these are things that came up in the discussions and the research on this matter, and it went to our council, and our council was unable to reach a decision that would allow us to move forward and support this. So Bloomfield cannot support this matter. But I still would like to have the answer about the transportation, who gets it, and the education, who gets it. How do we know it actually is going to go there? I know there's an auditor involved and some other things, but a lot of people are suspicious, so I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Mr. Bowditch. Can you take us through some of the accounting and how we know that there will be accountability?
Sure. So the projected $310 million refund for this fiscal year 1920. Again, that will change on Friday, change on December 20th, March 20th, June 20th. At the end of the fiscal year, let's say it doesn't change. Let's say it's still $310 million magically. The end of the fiscal year, 1/3 of that, so $103 million, as an example, would be sent to institutions of higher education. The authorizing legislation does not say how that will be divided. However, I also, just as an example, I also represent Fort Lewis College in Durango. The president has asked me, how much would we get? And I said, well, based on our current share, if you take $100 million, give it to higher ed, Fort Lewis would get $1.4 million. Fort Lewis is very small, one small school. University of Colorado would probably get $40 million across its 4 campuses and so on. There's no restrictions on how the money is spent, but I guarantee you, and the legislation, the authorizing legislation says there shall be a report on how the money is spent. So that $100 million would go to higher ed, similar to K-12 education. That does say it shall be allocated on a per student basis to all the school districts. So again, using Jefferson County as an example, or Denver, both are about 10% of the state. So if you live in Denver, this passes, DPS would get $10 million. They could spend it right now with there's no guidelines other than improving student learning, which is a pretty broad category. They'd have to spend it, and then there'd be a report posted on the legislative website at the end of that first fiscal year saying, this is how those monies were spent. For transportation, the same thing. Go to the HUTF, there'd be a reporting mechanism back.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Director Beacom, did you have any other comments?
Oh, that was it.
Director Peck.
Thank you. I do understand why Tabor was put into law to begin with, and it is that accountability piece for the state. However, just knowing in Longmont we're trying to do our budget, we have to do a lot of transportation cuts because we just don't have enough money. And our projects are pushed out till 2030, 2050 because of that. I don't think that 110, especially in Longmont, passed because of did not pass because of Tabor. It did not pass because of the whole perspective of what transportation with CDOT and RTD was, and the lack of transportation dollars from those 2 entities. I will be supporting this because I do think that, number one, we do need the money, and I think that if it's worded correctly, which I think it is, that it has a good opportunity to pass. So I will be supporting it. We need the money. That's at the end of the day, that's what it's about. If we, and I guess this is the ratcheting effect, if we go to the voters for another tax, that new revenue is subject to Tabor. So we never get exactly what we are asking the voters for. We never get to use it. So it seems like it is a constantly revolving cycle that we can't get out of. So I will be supporting it.
Thank you. Director Champion?
Yes, just a comment, and I like what I've heard tonight. In my opinion, the reason why we at Columbine Valley debruced was because the residents feel like the town council is doing what the citizens want us to do. There's a reason why we haven't debruced the state of Colorado, and that has to do with the state legislature. Everybody seems to be really put together until they go to the state legislature, and that's why I'm going to vote against this.
Thank you. Director John Marriott, sorry.
Thank you. I just want to bring up this concept of total tax burden. And I think our citizens, our residents have a limit to the total amount that they can be taxed. Taking this Tabor limit away adds to the total tax that they will pay via either not getting refunds or no reduction in the state tax rate. And so it has the effect of strengthening the state's government's position at the expense of local government. In Colorado, we have a system where half of all government spending is at the state level, the other half is at the local level. The part of this that passes through to the local governments in the transportation funding is a very small pittance for the damage that taking away taxing capacity does. I think this passing makes it much harder for us in the future to pass local taxing measures that may increase taxes. And so for that reason, personally, I think this is a very bad idea for us to support. However, my council took a vote and directed me to vote for it, so I will be.
Thank you, Director Marriott. Are there other people in the queue who would like to, Director Dale? Daigle, sorry, Sally.
Call the question.
Yes.
Happy face.
Wait a minute. There we go. I got it. So I will break it down for you as I've been on the school board in Sheridan since 2009, and I was elected again for another 4 years. So we don't have term limits because no one wants to do that job because you don't get paid for it. There are 178 districts in the state of Colorado. 108 of those 178 are considered small rural districts. In 2016, 2017, we haven't gotten the numbers yet for last year. There were 905,019 students enrolled in school, this public education. The average per pupil funding the state of Colorado gives to school districts is $7,419 to pay for a school year, which sounds great, except for you pay for the building, the maintenance, the bus drivers, the buses, the staff, the cooks, the janitors, the teachers, the principals, the administration, and all of that. And by the time you're done paying all of that out of the $7,419 per student, the state of Colorado pathetically pays $1,818 per student to educate the children of this state. It is high time. I'm sorry. I have, in all these years, the biggest tax refund that I got as a working nurse, a single mom, $18. You can have my $18 times all of those years to go to education. I spend a lot of my time, a lot of my free time, fighting for kids, fighting for education, to educate your children, and we are number 48 out of the United States in funding for our students, and we are one of the richest states in the country. And it is appalling and pathetic that anyone would not vote yes to bring money into education, to bring money into higher education, and to bring money into transportation, because I drove out to Deer Trail last night to go see the new school in Deer Trail and the new library that's out there. The roads are appalling. And you cannot drive 85 miles an hour out there, which is what I really like to do. You're doing about 50 because the roads are so bad. This state needs to pull their heads out of their butts, get with the program, and start voting for things that matter. Most of the districts in Colorado last year, this year, the year before, have gone to their voters to ask for mill levy increases to pay the teachers. We have a crisis in the state of Colorado. Our teachers are paid lower than most states in the country. We were able to get a mill levy in Sheridan. We went to the voters, we knocked on doors, we got a mill levy increase. We now are able to pay the same amount for our incoming teachers as Littleton and Inglewood and Aurora. But before that, we were suffering. We were paying $32,000 a year for these people to teach your kids. Come on. This is important stuff. And a $35, you showed us, right? $35 is what I'm expected to get. Take my $35 and fix a pothole. Feed a kid. Do something brilliant with this money. And I do agree with Larry. Definitely, we need to go through everything that the state spends money on, and if it's a bad plan, get rid of it. If it's a great plan like education and transportation, hey, fund it. I'm voting yes. Not only for me, but when next month when I go to the CASB delegation, because I'm also a delegate there, I'll be voting yes then.
Thank you. Director Szabo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a question, and I don't know if it's for Ed or Mr. Rex or whoever wants to answer. We spend a lot of time talking about these kind of resolutions and different, things that come up out of the state legislature and stuff, and then we end up voting yay or nay and supporting or not supporting. Have we ever done any dive into, does it change people's votes that DRCOG is supporting or not supporting, or is it just something that we do to chat about? I mean, is it gonna, I know, I'm serious. Is all of this dialogue going to change one person's vote out there because they hear, oh my gosh, I was gonna vote no, but DRCOG's supporting it, I'm gonna vote yes. I'm just curious.
Thank you. We'll turn to Executive Director Rex.
Well, I'm going to say yes. I mean, I don't need data to tell me that. No, yeah, listen to the doctor. Yeah, I really don't know, to be honest with you, Director Szabo.
Thank you.
Do we have other people in the queue who would like to make a comment? I'm just going to hold on Director Flynn one moment because we haven't heard from everyone yet. Director Henry.
It's always nice to hear everybody talk, and I appreciate everybody's opinion. Adams County debruced. Our entire county voted to debruce the county, which I am so fortunate to be able to be on a county commission that is able to spend the money that we collect responsibly out into the community. And it's unusual for Adams County to actually do that because every transportation tax that goes on the ballot, we vote with Douglas County, which is usually hell no. So as commissioners, we believe that our citizens will be supporting this because of the fact that they actually had debruced Adams County. So I will be a yes vote.
Are there other folks who haven't spoken yet that would like to make a comment? Director Flynn?
Thank you. I just wanted to, I neglected when I was responding to Larry's issue about the senior homestead exemption, and then the other Larry about looking at the state budget and what's a high cost but with little benefit. The senior homestead exemption might actually be one of those on the block. And Ed, correct me, I believe in the last session or the session before, it was on the chopping block for elimination. Am I remembering that correctly?
Mr. Bowditch.
There have been discussions in each of the last 4 years about modifying the senior homestead exemption. There have been bills to do it, nothing's passed.
As we've had to, as the legislature has had to try to balance the budget. That is one of those programs because when I applied for it, the limitations are such that it's not every senior. You have to be in your primary residence for at least 10 years, which means if you move, you lose it for 10 more years. So that's one of those programs that I think wouldn't make the cut. And so selfishly, I think we ought to look to that too when we discuss giving the state enough resources to fund the programs that are doing some good. And I think our mission being transportation and our principles stating that we should look for additional sources compels me to say that we need to do yes here. Thank you.
Director Jones.
It seems like our conversation is winding down, and I was wondering if it would be appropriate to put a motion on the table at this point?
We can put a motion on the table. It will not end discussions. Just so if anyone's thinking they would like to speak, this wouldn't end discussion.
Absolutely.
Director Jones, would you like to offer a motion?
In the interest of it being 8 o'clock, I would. So I would move that DRCOG take a position of support for Proposition CC.
I'll second.
Second.
There's a motion on the table from Director Jones, seconded by several people, but we'll say Director Daigle. Is there discussion of the motion? All right, last chance for discussion of the motion or questions. So because we need to know exactly how many people, I'm not going to ask for a voice vote. I'm going to ask people to raise their hands if they're in favor of supporting the motion that's on the table to support to have DRCOG support Proposition CC. All those in favor, please raise your hands and keep them up.
29.
All right, there are 29. All those opposed? Abstentions? All right, the motion passes with 29 in favor. So DRCOG will be taking a position of support for Proposition CC. Thank you for the good debate. That takes us to our next agenda item, which is an informational briefing. It's attachment D in your packet. We'll have a briefing on Mobility Choice Blueprint Advanced Mobility Partnership. Jacob Rieger, our manager for Long Range Transportation Planning, is going to take us through this.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, everyone. Jacob Rieger, DRCOG staff. I don't quite know how to follow that conversation, except probably to keep this brief. But in the interest of unity, what I'm actually going to talk about is a committee, a regional committee, to help implement mobility choice. So hopefully this will be a good sort of change of pace, given the important conversation you just had. So first, just a little bit of a refresher. What was the Mobility Choice Blueprint? Many of you were involved with it, some of you weren't. So just to kind of bring us on the same page, it was a planning and funding partnership between DRCOG, CDOT, RTD, and the Denver Metro Chamber, really to look at the implications and the effects of technology on mobility in the years to come. So we immediately think of, like, connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, even drones, those sorts of things. We did look at those issues. We looked at a lot of other issues, but it was really to put together that game plan of, how should this region respond to the almost daily changes in technology and its impacts and effects on challenges and opportunities on mobility in the region going forward. The Mobility Choice Blueprint we worked on throughout 2018 and early this year in 2019. The final blueprint report had 34 recommendations that we call tactical actions. Of those 34 recommendations, DRCOG sort of signed up to be the initiator of 18 of those. Most of the recommendations were ones that were, really a partnership. Even if one agency was taking the lead on implementation, there was a partnership of several agencies recognizing the cross-cutting work that many of those tactical actions, took into consideration to implement mobility choice. Having said that, of those 18, the most important one, and it's actually the very first one in the report, and the most important one for DRCOG was to establish sort of a regional committee that would really coordinate these efforts around technology implementation, coordination between agencies, testing things, idea generation, partnerships, all of those sorts of things. So since the conclusion of the Mobility Choice Blueprint report, our agencies have been working together to put some definition and some legs on that committee. So we proposed to call it the Advanced Mobility Partnership, or the AMP committee. This diagram is in your packet. It looks more complicated than it really is. Sort of at the basic level, it's a sort of two-part structure. One is a committee, is the advisory committee itself, which we're calling the AMP working group, and you can see the proposed membership here. Sort of the point of this is that there's sort of that core voting membership, which is the agencies involved in mobility choice, the transportation agencies of the region, DRCOG, RTD, CDOT, the Denver Metro Chamber, and then this bottom one on the left here, this UTAC, this is an academic sort of consortium, the University Transportation Alliance for Colorado. Colorado State University, University of Colorado Denver, and University of Denver have come together in this informal alliance to work on transportation issues. They were involved in mobility choice. We propose that they be involved here as well. So with this sort of core membership, we also recognize that there's a lot of other players, all the local governments, all of you in this room, representatives from our Transportation Advisory Committee, our Regional Traffic Operations Working Group, NREL, businesses, the other folks that you see here. The point is that, again, we want to have these partnerships and the cross-cutting sort of stakeholder involvement and integration to work on these issues. So this is the working group committee. They would meet monthly. And then quarterly, we would have what we call the AMP Executive Committee. This would involve the executive directors of, again, those core stakeholder agencies, CDOT, DRCOG, RTD, and the Denver Metro Chamber. They would take sort of the recommendations of the AMP working group and actually take formal action on those recommendations. What's neat about this concept is, again, the recognition of the stakeholders involved, that as these actions or as these ideas bubble up through this process, there will be things, for example, that may ultimately, maybe be a CDOT lead, and the executive committee would direct that then to CDOT and the Transportation Commission. Or it's something maybe that's a DRCOG lead, and it would come to our committees and to all of you as our board. So part of the function of the executive committee is to sort of have that equality between the stakeholder agencies and to appropriately direct the issues as they come up to the various agencies. So this in a nutshell is kind of the structure that we've been working on with our partners, continuing to evolve this and work on this. No action required here tonight, but wanted to kind of show you the current thinking of our agencies as we work to put this together and invite any comments or questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rieger. Are there any questions or comments? If you have any after this evening, feel free to call or email Mr. Rieger. Thank you so much for that. So that takes us to our next agenda item, which is the briefing on the Regional Transportation District's first and last mile strategic plan, which Mr. Rieger is also going to take us through. And just as a reminder, he's our manager on long-range transportation planning.
Thank you very much. So on this one, I just have the hard job of introducing the speakers who are actually going to give the presentation. But in a nutshell, RTD has been working on its first last mile strategic plan for about the last 18 months. We've been involved. All of you have been involved. So as they finish this report and turn their focus to implementation, wanted to give you this briefing. So I'd like to introduce Bill Soroy and Paul DeRozier from RTD.
Thank you, Jacob. Again, my name is Bill Soroy. I'm the Senior Manager of Transit Communities at RTD, and I will, in my words of my old General Manager, go through this presentation smartly, and I've instructed Paul to do so as well. We're going to do a little tag team here. But just to introduce, we like Jacob said, we started this effort about 18 months ago, and it was made possible by a grant from DRCOG, so we were very thankful for that. But again, our primary purpose in looking at this is how do we make RTD more accessible to more people? Looking at how do we improve access to our facilities, our stations, and our bus stops, and what can we do to kind of make it easier for people to get to and from our facilities. Some of the clear goals of the plan really was to focus on partnerships. I think that in a lot of cases when we're talking about first and last mile, it's related to how do people get to our facilities? So it's talking about local streets and how do we get, private services or other things and how do they get to our facilities? So that's really a big, partnerships was a big element of this. Also, obviously, to look at transit accessibility and ridership. How do we improve ridership? How do we make it easier for people to get to and from our facilities? And lastly, looking at how we actually prepare for rapid changes in technology, looking at things like apps and other things that we knew that if we make improvements in those areas, we can actually make it easier for people to access. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Paul to go through kind of quickly kind of the process and the schedule for the study.
Great, thank you, Bill. So I'm going to kind of get into a little more detail, but again, staying at somewhat of a high level. So this process was an 18-month process. We, as you can see here from the schedule, had a very robust stakeholder and outreach process that I'll go into in a bit later. But being as though that the study was completed in June 2019, we are now focused on implementing several pilot projects that, again, I'll talk about in more detail later. There are four main components of the plan. The development of station typologies. Of course, RTD is a gigantic district, 2,400 square miles, and so we couldn't look at each station specifically. We needed to develop a general type of station, and we, in addition to those general types, we also added some overlays onto those station types. So a great example of that is if you're going to buy an SUV, you might also buy, maybe a brown SUV or something like that. But just to add a little more detail to what that station type was, we also developed a toolkit of recommendations as well as looked at 15 stations in detail. So within those typologies, here we have urban core, urban, suburban mixed, suburban residential, and rural. And where you see these three middle categories is where you typically see the first and last mile cropping up the most. It's first and last mile tends to be a land use and density based issue. So where that crops up the most, of course, is in suburban areas where transit doesn't necessarily operate as efficiently, nor does accessing those stations. And if you look at the lower sort of column there, you'll note that when you add all of those together, the 12, 46, and 37 together, that comprises 95% of all of RTD stations throughout the district. So if 95% of our stations are in these areas where first and last mile is a very significant issue, it is a very important thing that we look at solving. So again, some of these overlays I mentioned, these really were born out of our stakeholder engagement process. Who are the groups that are going to be most impacted by transit? At the very top of that list, historically vulnerable populations. These are low-income communities as well as minorities. These are communities that historically depend on transit. And so when we think about helping address first and last mile, we want to keep these groups at top of mind. And other things like parking utilization. There's a station that is very near and dear to me, Wagon Road Park and Ride. I used to use it very frequently. Any of you who have used that Park and Ride know that it fills up at about 8 o'clock in the morning. So when we look at how do people access the facilities and what are the conditions that they might consider alternative means of getting there, aside from driving, parking utilization factors into that heavily. Can I find a parking spot or can I not? So the toolkit that I mentioned earlier, we separated into 5 distinct categories. So improvement and reuse of existing infrastructure, new infrastructure like new sidewalks, filling sidewalk gaps, first and last mile general guidance that really kind of deals with the experience of using transit. Is there a shelter? Are there shade trees when you're walking to get to the facility? Things of that nature. Transportation demand management deals primarily with the promotion and education of the population about what existing resources are available to them, and then things like transportation services, which might be included like Uber, Lyft, scooters, shared scooters, things of that nature. So those are kind of the 5 themes. There are about 30 distinct strategies within that toolkit. Then within our representative stations, so this is kind of that third category I talked about, I'm going to take you through two examples here in just a moment. But again, on that public outreach, again, this is really important to us. In the lower right corner, you can see that we developed an online map. And we went out to stations and we wanted to hear directly from consumers. How did they get to stations? What were the things that were important to them? And we heard 3 really important things. And frankly, those don't just relate to first and last mile. It has to do with transit use in general. And that's speed, reliability, and convenience. These are the things that people care about when they're thinking about not, again, just first and last mile, but how they would do any trip. So we wanted to take those things into account. So when we looked at each of these stations in detail, there are 2 stations that are, I think, juxtaposed against each other well. So I already mentioned Wagon Road. This is at 120th and I-25. It's in Westminster, but it's also right near Thornton and North Glen as well. And it fits into that suburban mix category. So you have both a combination of jobs as well as residences there. But it's also surrounded by some really high-speed, high-volume arterials, being 120th and Huron. That makes accessing those facilities very difficult for pedestrians and bicyclists, which is important when you think about the fact that about 75% of all people who use RTD access it by walking. So if we want to try to improve ridership, as Bill mentioned earlier, we really want to focus on those pedestrians and how they access it. Federal Alameda is an on-street station. It has no parking associated with it whatsoever. And in this case here again, you have a lot of people accessing the facility by walking, and frankly, most all of them are. But it's also been defined as one of the most fatal corridors in the state of Colorado. So when we moved into the assessment portion of these representative stations, we wanted to look at that issue of walking accessibility. And so if you look at Federal Alameda as well as Wagon Road, the green splotch essentially outlines how far you can get if you were to start from the center of that circle and walk 10 minutes out of it. And so when you see Huron to the north and the south, as well as 120th to the east and west, you can distinctly see how that impacts pedestrian access to those stations. So taking that information into account, we moved towards recommendations. And although some of these stations have those unique characteristics associated with them based on where they're at, we wanted to respect the fact that each of those stations has user groups that are going to, access them in their own unique way. So in Federal Alameda, this graphic at the top right here is actually taken from the City and County of Denver's Vision Zero process, in which they're attempting to create some better access, some mid-block crossings where pedestrians can find some refuge in the middle of Federal, I believe is the example here, as well as in the Wagon Road example, where you have so many people. We have actually 1,200 parking spaces there. And so we're looking at potentially doing things like integrating into CDOT's variable message signs that would indicate things like parking availability, or what the travel time savings might be if you were to use transit. And we know that in very distinct corridors, including I-25 and US 36, that it's actually faster for people to get downtown using transit than it would be to drive, based on some of our available services and the congestion that you would run into driving. So that's information that people don't necessarily have at top of mind. So again, I'll run through this, but Bill mentioned this. Partnerships are really key to first and last mile. They frequently cross jurisdictional boundaries, and it really becomes very important that we form those partnerships. RTD does not control right-of-way, and many of these improvements deal with right-of-way improvements. So forming those partnerships with all of you, your local government's staff, is extremely important to addressing this issue, as well as the private sector. This flow chart really kind of talks about who will take the lead, and given the amount of text on here and the time, I think I'm going to move through this, but really what is attempting to say here is that within infrastructure projects that are outside of our property, we really need to focus on those partnerships. For things that are improvements that are on our property, of course, RTD would take the lead. That's kind of the main takeaway here. So again, I mentioned those pilot projects, and the one that we're primarily focused on right now is wayfinding signage. And we actually did receive some funding through DRCOG to develop a wayfinding signage type, and so that's designing what that might look like. And very recently, I believe the Transportation Advisory Committee will get some recommendations, and the wayfinding signage, I believe, is on that docket to be a project that would be recommended for funding, and I imagine that will end up in front of this body as well eventually, as well as mobility hubs. And this is a concept that is kind of tossed around, I wouldn't say loosely, but I would say that there are multiple definitions of what a mobility hub is. What we want to do here is essentially pilot the concept in a variety of contexts. So in an urban area, in a suburban mixed environment. We want to essentially work with private operators and try to create a trip in which people not only have the availability of public transit service, but also private within a physical space. So I think most of you have heard about some of the partnerships that we've developed. We have license agreements with all 5 operators, scooter operators within the City and County of Denver, as well as some of our partnerships specifically on providing RTD ticketing in a variety of different app apps that are available in the market, including Uber and Transit app. And then within the study, we also, knowing that we had some limitations in the number of representative stations that we looked at, we wanted to create this framework so that local planners could apply this within their own area if they did not have a representative station that was included in our study. So I think for this last slide, really it's kind of to say that I think most of you have heard about our Reimagine RTD process, where we're looking at our services holistically. First and last mile will factor into that in terms of how we prioritize that as an agency, both budgetarily as well as programmatically. And we look forward to working with all of you. Again, our process right now is to schedule meetings with a lot of the local government staff and determine where we can create some synergies around projects. We all know that you all have your own focus areas in terms of first and last mile and transportation projects. And we look forward to having those meetings and continuing this conversation. So I want to thank you all for your time, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. We can take a couple of questions if there are 1 or 2 questions this evening. Director Elrod.
Or maybe it's just us. Just for clarification purposes, some of the recommendations you made there, the mobility hub, was that focused on addressing those suburban areas? So it was about that that core group that is where the biggest gap is. So that's where you're envisioning some of those solutions?
It would be one of a few different contexts. So if you remember the one slide I had where it kind of showed our different station types, the urban, suburban mixed, and suburban residential. So we would look to implement the mobility hub concept in those different station types, and it might look a little bit different based on where it is. That's essentially how we're anticipating moving forward with that pilot.
Okay. Second question, for property that is owned by RTD, you would take responsibility. It appeared that you would take responsibility for the infrastructure, and would infrastructure include parking, garage, for example?
I'm going to let you take that one.
By the way, I'm in Littleton.
Parking is a big issue, and we did not specifically address it in this. One of the things that we did, we will be deferring the parking discussion to the Reimagine process in terms of looking at, because we know there's a lot of you out there that would love to have more parking, or maybe even some cases get rid of parking where that's not being utilized. So we are going to take that on as an issue in the Reimagine process and going to come out with specific recommendations with that.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. One from Director Henry, and everyone else, let's take down the contact information.
I have high verbal needs, so it'll be about 45 minutes, just saying.
I can empathize.
I just want to give a little bit of input. One, thank you for considering suburban and urban. I really appreciate hearing suburban in the vocabulary, and we do have different transportation needs. So thank you for considering that. Another thing that I had a little bit of a concern about is the fact that you're actually considering for us to use the Lyft or Uber to get to the bus, considering we have one of the highest transit fees in the nation. To ask people to actually use Uber or Lyft to get to the bus transit and then get on the bus might be a little unreasonable, especially for those of us in the suburban area. I came to Denver to watch the symphony on Sunday, did not take transit because it was cheaper for me to park and faster for me to get downtown Denver. So when you guys are looking at these concepts, please don't add to our transportation costs by considering Uber and Lyft.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the presentation. That takes us to our committee reports. So I would request that we have brief reports from the following committees, starting with the State Transportation Advisory Committee. Director Jones?
Are you trying to get home to your anniversary celebration, perchance? All right, I'll be quick. At the August STAC meeting, we got an update from Rebecca on their planning process, it's going to be slowed down a little bit rather than being completed by December. They're looking at March. They're doing extensive outreach. We clarified that DRCOG would get to drive its project prioritization here inside our MPO boundaries. That was important to us. There's a pretty healthy discussion about how to prioritize, how to decide how the new money from the legislature was going to be spent, and that's going to be disconnected from the longer-term planning process. And then the last thing I'll mention is that the federal lands program out of the FHWA is really trying to better connect with local and state transportation plans. These are the access funds and planning grants to connect to our federal lands. And they're really wanting to hear from us on how we'd like to coordinate with them, and they're doing a pilot project up at Rocky Mountain National Park to try to deal with some of the congestion and overcrowding there. So it's an opportunity for our local governments to participate with FHWA on this.
Thank you. Is there a mayor present that could give us an update on the Metro Mayor's Caucus? Thank you, Mr. Starker.
The Metro Mayors have not met since the last report to the doctor.
Thank you. Similarly, is there a county commissioner that could give us an update on the metro area county commissioners? We'll get an update next time from Director Partridge. We will get an update next time when Jayla's back for the area committee on aging. Is there, Director X, could you give us an update on the Regional Air Quality Council?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mentioned 3 things. We had a presentation on the 2018 audit. It's a clean audit, which was great. We also established a control strategy committee, and we actually had our first meeting today, so we're really starting to ramp up discussions about control strategies associated with the new state implementation plan, so stay tuned for that. And last, I want to mention we had a presentation on climate change from a Professor Scott Denning from Colorado State University. I don't know if anyone's had the pleasure of I've seen a head nod over here. He was fabulous. So if you're looking for a speaker, he's tremendous. I'm going to try to get him in front of you all too. So that's it.
Thank you very much. That takes us to the E470 Authority. No report. And Mr. Van Meter is not here this evening, so we will get an update on the report on fast tracks at the next meeting. That takes us to our informational items. You'll find attachment F in your packet, the 2020 to 2023 Transportation Improvement Program Administrative Amendments. Any questions? Anyone have any comments on that? And attachment G, you'll find the DRCOG scorecard report, so you can reach out to Todd Cottrell or Jerry Stiegel with any questions you have on those. The next meeting is scheduled for October 16th, 2019. Remember that we don't have the work session this month in October. Are there other matters by members? Director Olson.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Members?